it's hard to manage those competing interests. I'm the deal guy. I want to do lots of deals because doing deals is fun and buying companies is fun and it's very exciting. But at the same time, we need to manage the engineering culture because ultimately those people have to work together, hopefully for years to come.
Yeah, really interesting. Related to valuation, of course, is generating competition for a deal. So Elad, maybe I'll turn this one over to you. How do you go about, as a startup founder, getting more than one party interested in a deal so you have a little more leverage? I believe you mentioned with Mixer you had a couple parties interested. How do you get some heat on a deal, basically?
I think fundamentally, once you have one offer, then it becomes very natural for other people to get interested. And so that could be mentioning the offer to advisors, and this is before you sign any sort of exclusivity or anything else. So you need to make sure that you, are timing it properly. That typically, so if you mention it to advisors or other people who have connections into these guys, and they hear, for example, that Google is looking at a specific company, then they may get interested, and then the company can sometimes end up going through the rounds. Or alternatively, if it's an interesting enough space or it's considered a big strategic asset, then often companies will be proactively going after the company. And so I don't know anything at all behind the details of what's been happening with Foursquare, but I'm assuming that in a lot of cases, companies have been going and approaching them versus them having to go and solicit interest.
Interesting. And Corp Dev guys, I know it's a little bit contrary to your interest to comment on this, but any tips on what startups should or should not do to get some heat on a deal? Do you usually ask startups to sign a no-shop clause, and if so, when does that come into play? Mike, go for it. How do these guys sell their startup for insane valuations is the question, really.
I mean, listen, you're all very smart, and to tell you anything other than the truth would be stupid. Get multiple offers and get a bidding war going, right? If I were in your shoes, that's what I would try to do. There's not a lot of rocket science to that aspect of it. Of course, we're going to tell you we want to be the only home for you. We think we're the right home. We're going to be your best friend, blah, blah, blah. We do think we have a good company, and we're happy with what we're doing. But let's talk money for a minute, because this is life-changing stuff for many of you. So get multiple bidders, manage your process, and don't sign a term sheet until you're really sure you want to do the deal. We don't give term sheets unless we want to buy your company. Like, it's not kind of a joke or a second date for us. It's like we really want to buy your company. Mm-hmm. And by the same token, when you sign a term sheet from us, and most companies, I think, usually has a no-shop clause in it. For those of you who don't know what that is, it means that you can't go try to get a better deal or a comparable deal. You've kind of said, I'm hitching my horse to this wagon. So don't do that unless you're really sure. Until then, do it a lot and hustle, because you owe it to yourselves and the people who presumably work for you to get them the best deal that you
can. Maybe blah, blah, blah. But, again, our philosophy is, and frankly, partially this is pragmatism. I mean, the fact of the matter is Google has tens of billions of dollars on their balance sheet. So if we just sort of jerked our head around every time we heard in the market that they were looking at something and started chasing it on price, frankly, if Larry and Sergey want it, they're going to get it. So it sort of is the nature of that. And so I think we've taken a little bit of different approach, and it goes back to sort of that longer dialogue of trying to find the right fit and trying people that sort of think that that when they come in the business, that truly it's not just about an exit, and it's not just about the fact that they're going to sort of get to keep doing what they're doing inside of us, but that there's something that we have, whether it be the reach of the network, whether it be the sales force, or something that they look at and go, you know what, yes, I can get an exit, but number two, I actually get to sort of build a bigger business inside of Yahoo, and that's something there. I think we fully realize that, and I think the thing I would agree with everyone on is the forcing function of getting to a decision on a rapid timeline. Having someone else in the boat totally matters, but I think you can't get too hung up on just chasing another offer for the sake of chasing another offer. I would just sort of counsel, say, ask yourself whether or not it's fair. And if you think it's fair and it's where you want to end up, you may be completely wasting your time. If you're really in with Amin and you want to end up at Google, going and calling us, trying to get a competing offer when he's already put a fair offer on the table. And if that's where you should, again, know enough about the differences of the companies, the strategies, the people, to understand which one's a good fit for your team and your product. And so I totally understand where Mike's coming from. And again, it is a capitalist country, and you should absolutely go for it. And we're all fine with that. And again, we're going to pay what we're willing to pay, and you're going to sell for what you're willing to sell. And if those two things match, we're going to get something done, and we're fine with that. But I think remember that fundamentally a deal is a beginning and not an end.
Yeah, I think I would add to what's been said already, that a lot of this and a lot of the questions that have been asked tonight, I'll keep going back to why are we doing the deal? Where are we in the process of doing the deal? Because if we're at the point where we're issuing a term sheet, and we're the same way, when we issue a term sheet, it will have a no-shop clause. We feel like we're dedicated at that point, and we hope that you're dedicated as well. We've assessed fit on both sides. So at that point, if you actually take our term sheet and go shop it, that would be upsetting to us, quite frankly. And it depends, again, on the kind of deal. So if it's DoubleClick, which was owned by a private equity firm, that's purely financial incentive, one would argue, for the private equity firm to run an auction process and try to maximize valuation. It's not about team fit and that kind of thing. But if it's a team fit kind of acquisition, and you've gone to Facebook or Google 10 times, and you've had various dialogues with engineering managers, product managers on what you're going to do, how you're going to fit into the organization. There's this trust that's been building. We get to the point that we're issuing a term sheet. Then you turn around in the shop that. I think that's inappropriate. So it depends where you are and what you're seeking to do.
Yeah, and I would add two things to that. One is, you can optimize for valuation, but again, you don't want to go somewhere that you're going to be miserable, especially if you have a multi-year vest, because again, that just means all that value is going to go away because you'll leave early anyhow. Second, if you do sign a term sheet, one of the things that I would encourage negotiating in is actually a very short diligence period, as short as possible, and that does two things. One is I think it streamlines the process in terms of ensuring that there's less wiggles and waggles around the road as you're negotiating. Less sort of last-minute things can come up. But second, it also gives you a shorter window so that if things don't work out with that acquirer and you're really set on doing an acquisition, you don't become extremely stale as a company.
How long? When you say short, how short is short? What, give a time frame.
It depends, because you could front load a lot of these things. So if it's a purely team acquisition, you would probably want to see resumes, right? Mike, you'd probably want to see some kind of overview of the skill of the team, the makeup of the team, and you'd probably want to see that before you actually make, as a corporate acquirer, a go, no-go decision. But again, if it's a secret sauce, which is ancillary, if it checks out somewhere down the process, but you anticipate that process taking 30, 60 days, 45 days, what have you. I mean, there's a range, and it depends, again, on the size of the company and the complexity. Now, for a small company, I was just going to add, to ask for a small diligence period, diligence is a two-way street. Mm-hmm. So what we find is the smaller companies that are not VC funded, for example, they tend not to have their books in order. They tend not to have somebody who can run the business and deal with the disruption that this M&A process causes for them. So those deals, that's why I mentioned earlier, tend to take longer, and the diligence period takes longer, not because of us. It's frankly not us, it's you.
That's a good comment.
Yeah, and I think just sort of riffing on that, it's like, again, it's fundamentally a collaborative process, and we have no interest in dragging our feet, because invariably we want to sort of get something done and get on to building the business that we see together. Oftentimes, essentially, we ask for what we think is enough time to sort of get something done. We also automatically have auto-renew clauses in there so that we don't have to stop and renegotiate and things like that. And sometimes people have questions about that, but our philosophy is, again, I'm not aware of us ever having gone through a signed term sheet and not close a deal. I mean, I'm sure at someday it'll happen because you'll find some gnarly bad thing that will make you walk away. But in general, as these guys have said, we don't take it lightly. I mean, if you put a term sheet out there, it's because you're trying to get something done, and then from that point forward, you really truly are partners in terms of getting all the information out there, working through the process, and getting everyone bought off and getting it done. And as Amin said, it's like the biggest gating factor is that startups are going through this for the first time, and oftentimes they've been running their business as they should, and not like having everything in a file cabinet ready to go and show us and prove that everything's in order. So it just oftentimes takes longer than they imagine to sort of get it all in order. And so what I often do is when we have whatever that timeline is that we've set up, we talk about milestones, and I basically say, we will give you, on the day that we sort of present this, we'll give you our super duper diligence list that has all the stuff that we're going to need. If you can get a fully populated data room with that inside of by X date, I will commit to you that I will drive our forces harder than they've ever been driven to hit whatever that date is. And so it's one of those things where it has to be, you have to develop a trust factor to get a deal done, and it's a two-way street. And so then if they miss that deadline, it's not that I'm not going to keep trying to move fast, but just we're all on the same page around sort of what's holding it up, and then we're trying to work together to get it over the finish line.
Let's expand on this a little bit, and talk about where do deals fall apart. What are common pitfalls that cause a deal to derail? I mean, having your books not quite in order it might slow the process, but it's typically not going to stop it. Why do deals fall apart? If you can pick out the top few reasons.
I mean, in our case, the few that have are because we have some assumption.
This is not about Groupon. This is a broader question. No. Sorry. Bad question.
Sorry, Brandon. It goes back to key assumptions regarding why we're doing the deal. So if we're doing the deal based on the strength of the technology to do X, Y, and Z, and we go in and actually due diligence and we saw that it's snake oil, that could fall apart. Or I'm sure if you're considering a team that you think is strong at doing X, Y, and Z, and you go through the interviews and you find out that's not the case, it could fall apart. But if you're acquiring a small technology and team company, and that's why you're doing it, whether their balance sheet showed 200K in debt and you in diligence somehow you find out it's 300K, at least for a company like Google, is not going to be dispositive on whether you do the deal.
You guys have anything to add on typical reasons why deals have fallen apart, or?
I mean, as we talked about, I think by the time you get to a term sheet, so much work has been front-loaded that in this day and age, it's extraordinarily rare for something to fall apart that part. I think when things fall apart before that, oftentimes it's people trying to be too cute or cagey or whatnot. And some point, they're just, you lose that trust, and you're not selling us a used car, right? I mean, we're trying to put something together, and it is an acquisition, but it's fundamentally a sort of this partnership of the starting of putting something together. And so it's not just with the deal lead or whatever that you have to build that trust. It's also with the business sponsor, the technology lead, and all that stuff. And I think the things I see, at least sometimes you can save it, but the things that lead things off course is when people aren't forthcoming. It's a lot better to say, yeah, look, I've got a great team. This guy's great. This guy's doing okay. He's serving a purpose now. I think he has some upside, but realistically, you sort of call it like it is, and you develop credibility. And again, we've all seen a lot of these things, whether it's technology or people or market risk or whatever. Yes, you should absolutely be positioning yourself in the best light that you would want us to perceive you in, and that's fine, and we're comfortable with that. But you should also make sure that you do that with a full set of facts. Like, the absolute worst thing you could possibly do is try to sort of duck and dive and sort of think that we're not going to find something, because by the time we're done with diligence, we'll have found pretty much everything. And so you better just get it out there early, and then we'll work through it together and see if we can get something done.
I would throw in two other things. One is I've seen this happen more recently with a large private company that a friend of mine was one of their first acquisitions, and in that case, there's a lot of ambiguity in the term sheet, and I think it was just a lack of savvy on both sides, which led to a lot of heartbreak and sort of issues later on in the process. So that's one thing. The second thing is we're talking about the deal falling apart, but I think another thing to consider is your company falling apart during the process, because it's a huge distraction. As a founder, you're trying to run a business